The Lions have been the number one fantasy offense for 2 straight years, but that streak is at a risk with their play caller Ben Johnson leaving town. We dig into the top 3 storylines for the Detroit Lions as they enter the 2025 season on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst for NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
We are continuing to go through all 32 teams and their top 3 storylines of the offseason as we enter the 2025 season and talking about all the biggest things we're looking at for fantasy football next year with these teams. We're moving on to the Detroit Lions today. And I mean, we could have picked out like 100 storylines with this team, right? They have been the best fantasy offense in the NFL for 2 straight years, but there's a huge change with Ben Johnson leaving. Is it all these playmakers that have made them so great for fantasy, or was a big part of that Ben Johnson? It's probably a little bit of both. So we have to decide how much of an impact it'll have with the change at offensive play caller. But the biggest part of that is how much it'll affect Jared Goff, right? And how much it affects Jared Goff will affect the whole offense and affect Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam LaPorta and Jameson Williams. However, it shouldn't, I don't think, affect the running backs all too much, no matter what, as long as they get their scoring opportunities and they both get their touches. But they have very different values going into the season. Of course, I'm talking about Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery here, the best running back duo in the league. And Jahmyr Gibbs right now is sitting at running back 3, behind only Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson in consensus rankings. And then with David Montgomery, he's sitting at running back 21, so much lower, ranks between Omarion Hampton, the rookie for the Chargers, and Aaron Jones, old man Aaron Jones. So out of these two, who are you giving the better value for in 2025? It might seem difficult because Gibbs is the running back 3, but is he worth that cost?
Yeah, I think that's what you have to decide. Is he going to score on the same level he did last season? And really, he was awesome last season. He kind of took over the backfield. You could see the transition happening. That said, David Montgomery still had double-digit touchdowns, 12 to go with his 13 the previous season. So let's look at this. I mean, Gibbs was just outstanding last year. I mean, there were games when he was the workhorse, and when he was the workhorse, he was incredible here. 23.5 points per game and half-point PPR. He did have some missed time, but still explosive, terrific down the stretch, especially as we went into the playoffs. He really kind of asserted himself as the explosive back and put the offense on his back again. So, again, he's an ascending player. You have Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson taken in the same first round as Gibbs. Again, no offense to Saquon Barkley, but again, we've seen the workload for an older back kind of affect him the next year. So we banged the table when we were talking about the Falcons about liking Bijan Robinson at 1, where I think there's a strong case for Gibbs to go 1, which means I like him at 2 over Saquon Barkley this year. So that would say he is still of value that high. Now let's look at David Montgomery. Look, he was just a few spots lower than where he finished. He was pretty consistent, I'd say, over the last 2 years, RB15 in 2023, RB16 in 2024. But the problem is, again, he scored 25 touchdowns. Will that continue? That's an insane amount. We saw it drop off when Jamal Williams left this offense from New Orleans. He was just nothing. Now, will that scoring continue? Because when I look at his numbers here, Michelle, that's 125 points when you add that 25 and you get the points for all those touchdowns. That is 31% of his total fantasy scoring the last year. That's a lot for any running back. Now, I always get a little nervous, right? Even when I had David Montgomery, a lot of teams last year said, oh, he's not going to be good unless he gets a touchdown. He's not going to be good. He's not going to be what I need out of him as an RB2 unless he scores. Then, boom, he scores or does something odd, like throws a touchdown pass, something where he does get those 6 points we're looking for. Because when you get those easy 6 points, again, when you look at it, it's the equivalent of either getting 12 catches in half-point PPR, which is really hard to do, just 6 catches in full PPR, and 60 yards from scrimmage. When you score it's a lot easier to put up those points, right? I mean, the path to scoring is there. But when you look at Michelle, can this continue? This is a lot. Maybe they go differently here with John Morton taking over as the play caller. He comes over from Denver. Denver was hard to read last year because they didn't really have one back that you could look at. But I think they're going to lean a lot on Gibbs this year, and he's the explosive play guy. And that's going to be a theme that I'm going to carry over through this entire show when we talk about the new OC. He wants explosive plays. That's what the Broncos were all about last season. That's the way they were so effective there with Bo Nix as their quarterback. So who's more explosive? Easily it's Gibbs, right? So he has that more explosive home run ability. If he's going to get those consistent 15 touches, he's going to blow it away. And at the same time, you're not going to get that same value, right, from David Montgomery. So, again, when you look at it, I think, again, Gibbs can knock it out of the park and actually rise above his RB3 ranking, where I think David Montgomery might actually slip from what running back 21, I should say. So running back 3, running back 21. I think that's fair, but I think the adjustment could even come more with a touchdown regression. So I say Gibbs closer to where his value is going to be. Well, Montgomery, you're probably going to get him at cost and maybe even lower than that when you take away the touchdowns.
Yeah, I'll say the thing that worries about me with Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's a fine pick at running back 3 overall cost. But when you look at the guys in the top 5 here in consensus rankings, it's Saquon Barkley, Bijan, Gibbs, Ashton Genty, and Derrick Henry. Those other 4 guys, you're not worried at all about anyone else splitting the backfield with them, right? Especially near the goal line whatsoever. They're going to get all the work. With Gibbs, David Montgomery is going to steal touchdowns away. I don't think Montgomery is just going to disappear from this offense unless somehow, they trade him away. I just don't see that happening. I feel like this is kind of the identity of their team is this duo running back. And Gibbs last year was great, but from weeks 1 through 15, he was still great. Don't get me wrong. Weeks 1 through 14, he averaged 16.9 points per game. Still great. That's about what Jonathan Taylor averaged last year, about what Josh Jacobs averaged. You're happy with that? And then the weeks 15 through 18, which happened to be the weeks David Montgomery was out. He got hurt very early in week 15, didn't play 16 through 18. He averaged 29 fantasy points per game. And this is in half PPR. Absolutely insane numbers. When David Montgomery's not out and he gets the full workload, Jahmyr Gibbs would be, like, if he got a full season of that, he'd be easily the running back 1 in my mind. Yeah. But I still think he's going to split. And even with splitting, he's still going to be a very good back. I'm worried about the running back 3 costs there. And again, Montgomery does get hurt, though, quite often. So there should be some time period where he gets hurt. But that's my worry there. With Montgomery, I actually don't have worries less. Like you brought up, running back 16, running back 15 the last 2 years. Yeah, maybe the whole offense won't be scoring as much if it goes down a little bit with Ben Johnson. Maybe he doesn't get as many touchdowns. However, like from weeks 1 through 14, again, he got early at week 15. He was averaging 15.3 fantasy points per game. That was nearly the same amount as James Cook. That was right below what sorry, I didn't have this up here. It was right below what Joe Mixon was averaging and Kyron Williams. Like, he was getting it done. I think he's a great running back, too, to roster. I'm actually fine with rostering both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and playing them every week. I don't think it has to be a one or the other. And he just consistently came through with running back 2 numbers, and he has the running back 1 upside as well in any given week, not on the season, I don't think, unless Gibbs were to go down. But I'm fine with both of them. And when you look at his ranking in between Marion Hampton and Aaron Jones, David Montgomery all day over those 2.
Yeah, it's nice to have both of these guys here in your lineup. And maybe the answer is both of them are really good values, and you just want to keep rolling with them here. And look, I think, Montgomery has a little bit more room to be a value, but I think there's also, I think you have to consider there's going to be some age and injury attrition that come there, and the touchdowns are really hard to duplicate for that type of player because they all came pretty easily for him last year. So I'd say that's close, but still you're getting pretty good value. Again, just don't discount that Gibbs could end up as the top fantasy back on the board. And he was an RB2, again, right behind Barkley. And if there's some regression for Barkley and Gibbs gets a few more scores, that would push Gibbs up there with Bijan Robinson as maybe the top 2 running backs in fantasy. So I'm excited to see what they can do. Yeah, Marion Hampton, you look at that, you're not quite sure where it's going to happen right out of the gate with Najee Harris. You look at Aaron Jones. So Montgomery, I say, is the safer kind of floor pick of that group. And then you can look at the ceiling maybe of Hampton if you want to stash it for the back end. So really, if you have these two guys in your backfield, and I did on a team, it was easy. I just play them every week.
Yep.
Got RB1, got RB2. You're in business. You don't really have to think about it, set it, and forget it. So excited about what they can continue to do without Ben Johnson. Again, John Morton was there with the Lions. We'll see how that affects their passing game and how he might call plays. We'll talk about all that with Jared Goff as well in our third segment right after this quick break. All right, this episode, Locked On Fantasy Football, is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are here. They're almost at the finish line, not quite at the finals, but we're here with the Eastern and Western Conference championships here. And we have a game right away. When you look at the Thunder and Timberwolves, Oklahoma City, blowing away the season, then rolling through the Nuggets here in the end. A lot of momentum going into that game. But I do like the Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards going into game one. And the spread right now is 7.5 in favor of the Thunder. I like the visiting Wolves to keep it a little bit closer there. So I'm siding with plus 7.5 on the Timberwolves for game one. You can do your own action there with the NBA playoffs at FanDuel. Every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or breakout, been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live during games. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Check it out right now. Get in on the action. Again, we have 3 series left, the conference finals and the NBA finals. New to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Michelle, it is time to look at the receiving core. Now, if there's one certainty in fantasy football of late, it's just Amon-Ra St. Brown. He just is a machine. He was wide receiver 4 in 2023, wide receiver 5 in 2024. He's ranked wide receiver 5 again. He's probably going to end up there because he's dominating the targets. He's a clear number 1. He gets open inside. He gets open outside. He's Jared Goff's go-to guy, much like Cooper Kupp was in Los Angeles. So we don't need to worry too much about Amon-Ra St. Brown. We'll talk about him, however. Looking at his domination, I mean, he's just consistent, and now he's a double-digit touchdown scorer the last 2 years. So that used to be an issue with him, so that's not anymore. Well, let's start there. Do you think he's one of the safest picks in fantasy, and do you keep not worrying about what he can do here in 2024?
Yeah, he's so consistent. That's why he doesn't even have to be a top storyline. It's like, if you want to take him at wide receiver 5, take him. Like, I don't think he has the wide receiver 1 overall where he's dominating and just like destroying the league week in and week out, where it's like he's just such a value where you're just killing people with him. However, it's so safe. Like, you don't really have to worry about him busting. He's going to get his 140 to 160 targets. He's going to get his touchdowns. He's going to get his fantasy points. And I guess in standard league, it might be a little scarier because he's not like a big time playmaker where he's getting a ton of yards per reception. And he has been getting a lot of touchdowns the last 2 years. Maybe that comes down a little bit, but in half PPR, full PPR, yeah, we don't have to worry about him. He's a fine value exactly where he's sitting. I don't think there's much to discuss with him about that. Now we have to figure out though, who will be the second target in this Lions new offense. Will it be Jameson Williams like he was used last year? Or will it be Sam LaPorta like he was used his rookie season, right? Which way will this go? And I do think it's very important for either of these guys because one of them I think will be fantastic value. And I'm leaning more the Sam LaPorta side, but let's talk about Jameson Williams real quick. He's sitting at wide receiver 27 rank, wide receiver 20 last year in average scoring. He just turned 24 years old. His first 2 years in the league were kind of just a wash, right? The first year coming off the ACL recovery. Second year, he had the suspension. It was just kind of a mess. Third year, he finally broke out. And why I'm worrying about his targets and if he's going to be the wide receiver or the second target on the team or not. In the 9 games, he saw at least 6 targets last year. He averaged 14.8 points per game. That was more than Nico Collins averaged last year in points per game. That was more than Malik Neighbors average. And it was just behind Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown, who we're talking about is a fantastic guy to draft in any given year. So when he got, and 6 targets is not that much to ask for. So if he is going to be the second target on this team, I do think Jameson Williams is a steal at wide receiver 27 My worry, though, is I do think Sam LaPorta will be the second target in this team come next year.
Yeah, I think the key for Jameson Williams to build on that production, he was very big play dependent. Let's not kid ourselves. He had 58 catches for 1,001 yards and 7 touchdowns last year. That is just insane, right? He was also targeted 91 times. So he was very big play dependent to get his numbers, and that's why he was able to be so efficient with the low target volume, right? With 6 targets or so. So when you look at that, I mean, will Jameson Williams become a more complete receiver in this offense? I'm not so sure. I think the one thing with John Morton, their new offense coordinator, he said he wants to keep the explosive element of this offense. But I don't think throwing to Williams more means you're going to add more to the explosive element. Like, I think they like it the way it is, where you kind of bludgeon a team a little bit with Gibbs and Montgomery. You throw to St. Brown and LaPorta, then boom, you get Williams downfield. Everyone's trying to handle everything short to intermediate routes, and you just destroy a team downfield. Jared Goff working off play action. So I think they like the progression of how those big plays happen in this offense, and they're not going to change it. And really, Morton did the same thing with Bo Nix, working with Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi. That's how it worked, right? Even though they didn't have a running game. Now they do have a legit running game. So I would say it's going to play off the running game to get those deep shots. So I think they remain calculated with Jameson Williams. I still think he can grow, but I don't think he's that traditional kind of outside receiver that you have with Amon-Ra St. Brown, especially with St. Brown seeing more of the outside targets. Now, Sam LaPorta is tight end 4. Now, it was really hard, right, to look at Denver and say, oh, there you don't throw to the tight end a lot. But they also had Adam Troutman as their best option here. And that's not going to say you're going to want to use your tight end. But Sam LaPorta is a pretty good kind of down the seam tight end when used. And that was the one notable thing, Michelle, from his numbers going for 2024. Yeah, the touchdowns dropped from 10 to 7. Yeah, the catches dropped from 86 to 60. And the targets went way down from 120 to 83. But the one thing that did go up was the yards per reception at 12.1, which is important. 2 yards you don't think is a lot, but that means they were throwing the ball downfield and using him more in that capacity. And if he had gotten the same number of targets, he would have blown away his rookie season numbers and been right there at the top. Really may have been the top scoring tight end for a second straight year if that had happened. So, again, you want to give him the volume, and that was the only thing holding him back, right? I mean, you look at those numbers. If he was averaging more per catch and was scoring at a high rate, just give him more work, and he's going to give you more production, right? And that's how I'm going to read it if I'm John Morton, to say, look, I need to get this guy even more involved. This was not enough last year in key moments, and he kind of got going late, right? The touchdowns, they didn't come in bunches or consistently until late in the season. So I'm feeling it too, Michelle, that LaPorta is valuable because he can do a lot of little things, set up the deep ball, and stretch the field himself. So I'm leaning toward LaPorta at tight end 4 being a better value than Williams at wide receiver 27.
And this is kind of what we were talking about when we were discussing like how important, when we were doing the schedule release, and how important it is for guys to get off to a hot start, because that's kind of where our mind stays with them the full season. Mm-hmm. And because Sam LaPorta was taken so early in drafts, and because the first half of the season went so poorly for him, he was seeing just 3 targets per game, 3.3 to be exact, and averaging 6.6 fantasy points per game from weeks 1 through 9. It was a disaster first half of the season. But then we're ignoring the full second half of the season from weeks 10 through 18, when he was averaging 11.5 fantasy points per game and seeing 7.1 targets per game. Those were the exact same numbers as what he averaged as a rookie. So it swung back to being Sam LaPorta, being that top option there behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. And like, we're just ignoring the 17 receiving touchdowns too here. Like, that's tied for the most among tight ends over the last 2 seasons that he's been in the league with Mark Andrews. The next closest is George Kittle at 14. Rob Gronkowski is the only tight end to have more touchdowns than LaPorta over a tight end's first 2 seasons in NFL history. And he gets a ton of red zone targets, 32 red zone targets over the last 2 seasons. Only Travis Kelce has more among tight ends over the last 2 years. Still super young at 24 years old. He's only going into his 3rd season. It's not like I'm trying to hate on his ranking too bad, because I think it's fair that George Kittle and Brock Bowers are ahead of him. However, I do think I prefer Sam LaPorta over Trey McBride, especially in standard or half PPR leagues. Once you get the full PPR, maybe McBride's a little bit safer. But I love Sam LaPorta this year and his value.
Yeah, I mean, I think you jump on it for sure. And again, the second half of the season and his entire rookie season, more an indication of what he can do. And in a strange way, like in your mind, right? If you're the play caller here, John Morton, you're going to be like, hey, I didn't have a very good tight end in Denver, and I had to force it to Troutman. Like, I have an elite tight end, so maybe I want to funnel all my targets to him a little bit more and stop getting the Brock Wrights of the world involved, like in certain scoring situations. I want to make him my key go-to guy. And they've said right away, they've clicked, right? I mean, Sam LaPorta sees some of that Dan Campbell energy from John Morton. They actually do have a bit of history on the staff. Morton was there with Campbell before, so he's going to probably not try to rock the boat too much from what Ben Johnson wants. So I do think that's going to also play in LaPorta's favor. So I'm excited about that. Now, the one guy that is putting it all together, we may want to drop a little bit, and that's Jared Goff, and we'll explain that here, I think. All right, Michelle, let's look at Jared Goff here, the quarterback who ties all these receivers together. Right now, he's ranked QB 10. Last year, depending on your scoring format, QB 7 or QB 8 that you're looking at. So he was solidly a QB 1 in the top 12 after finishing around 15 and 16 the previous 2 years. Johnson in those 3 years as Johnson was the offensive coordinator. Now, what do you think here? I mean, you look at Jared Goff. I think what happened last year, we're pretty clear on that, right? Some of the guys, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, Shane Daniels. We see all those guys potentially doing what they did last year. But Jared Goff seems to be the outlier. I think part of it starts with just being outdoors and having tougher matchups.
Yeah, the thing with you're not going to get any rushing from him, so you need the touchdowns. Last year, he threw 37 touchdowns, and it was just overall a bit of an outlier year from him. It's not like we've never seen this type of production. I mean, he had it back in 2018 with the Rams and Sean McVay, and then it went right back down for 5 years of what Jared Goff pretty much is. And it's not bad, but he's going to be around the quarterback 12 to 15 range, serviceable. Streaming quarterback, a guy that you'd be happy to have as your second quarterback in a super flex or 2 quarterback league. I just don't think we should be reaching for him in 1 quarterback leagues. It's not that quarterback 10 is so far out of range. It's just a few spots too high, I think. And he's in front of guys like Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, Brock Purdy, Caleb Williams. I do think I would prefer all those guys over Goff just because the ceiling is so much higher. And I'm not sure that maybe the floor of Fields and Caleb Williams is a little bit lower, but I would just rather take a shot on them. I will say, though, we are worried about his road schedule this year, right? We talked about that and how easy of a schedule he had last year, playing pretty much all dome games. But when you look at the schedule with the outdoor road games, it's Green Bay, Baltimore, Cincy, Chiefs. He does get those all over with by mid-October. So at least it shouldn't be freezing cold in those yet. Then he has at Washington and at Philadelphia in November. Those are probably going to be pretty rough games for him. However, the rest of the schedule from weeks 12 through 17, it's 5 dome games, 4 of them at home. And the one game that's not at home, or the one game that's not in a dome, is against the Rams. So LA, nice weather most of the year, right? I do think this is a guy we should remember to keep and to think about trading for after week 11, because that's the at Philly game. It could be bad in Philadelphia. I do think right before that trade deadline in fantasy leagues, I want to remember this. If Jared Goff is having a bit of a down year for fantasy, that we should trade for him before the end of the season.
Yeah, with Jared Goff, I mean, he's not exciting, right? If you take him, you're just hoping that he puts up enough touchdowns. Now, the most frequent result for him on the upside is around 30 touchdowns. He had 32 back in his breakout year with the Rams in 2018, 29, and 30 before he jumped all the way up to 37 last year. So it seems a little bit like he's been around a little bit in between 7.5 to 8 yards per attempt. He shot up all the way to 8.6. So everything about last year says it's an outlier. I know they want to push the ball downfield and make big plays, but they also can't go out of Jared Goff's comfort zone, which is kind of the progression off the play action and throwing deep there, right? I mean, that's what Jared Goff does best, operate an offense. Again, he's one of the more dependent quarterbacks in the league. That's not a diss but it's true. Like, he needs everything around him to be pretty good, including the offensive line, the running game, the deep threats, the intermediate guys. All that has been great for the Lions, obviously, with Ben Johnson. But again, you're right. The schedule alone changes things. I mean, it's not just these are outdoor games. Cincinnati, look, they're a disaster. They'll have to get better, a lot better defensively, but Green Bay can be tough. The Ravens can be tough. The Chiefs can be tough. These are outside, and then you figure the Eagles, that's not easy either on the outside part. So there's some other teams that you look for. The Bills are coming, right? So there's some really tricky games here that you're looking at overall on the schedule. Just a lot better teams. And this is the first time they've been kind of the hunted for sure. I mean, now they're an established power in the NFC. So you're going to get some really tough defensive games at your quarterback. I'm not saying the rest of the offense won't function at a high level and will deliver, but we've seen these guys produce big time independent of Jared Goff. So that's something you need to consider here. So again, I'm not into Goff at all. There's just too many guys with upside. I don't consider him a value, but you're right. If you're stuck in the end of the season, someone drops him and you're playing the streaming game, or you make a cheap trade, you can get a decent quarterback down the stretch. So we'll see. But again, everything points to a real regression in his numbers, kind of falling back to earth here for Goff in 2025.
Yeah, when you because of Dak Prescott's terrible down year last year, you can get, I mean, he's going at quarterback 16. I view Jared Goff and Dak Prescott in the same tier, right? And now Dak Prescott has two really good wide receivers as well. Goff's weapons are great, but Goff also plays with two running backs who are elite at taking away touchdowns from him, right? Well, Dak Prescott doesn't have that whatsoever, as we know of right now. So if I'm going to take a guy like Jared Goff to be my starting quarterback because I waited and I loaded up on other positions, which I think is a fine strategy if that, you're loaded everywhere else, I'm just going to wait on a guy like Dak Prescott.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And look, we talked about Caleb Williams and all these other great values. They're on the board all throughout. So again, he's just in a tough spot where you don't really want to invest, because that tends to be the area where you can find the sleepers that can rise into the 8 to 10, like a Jared Goff last year. So you want to find this year's version of Jared Goff, who's not the actual Jared Goff.
Yes, 100%. That's a great point. That will be it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We will be back tomorrow talking about the Green Bay Packers. Do not miss it. Bye, y'all.